There was a forest behind our house. It had always been there as long as we lived there. It was huge, probably about 30 acres of complete wilderness, and it was filled with all kinds of wildlife. There were deer that would come into our yard to eat the azaleas every spring, and sometimes we would see coyotes or even black bears in the winter when the snow was on the ground. It was an old-growth hardwood forest, so the trees were hundreds of years old, and some of them were over 100 feet tall. The trees were beautiful, but they dropped branches and leaves all the time, and they made walking through the forest a real chore. My dad always said if we wanted to do anything with that forest, we'd have to cut it all down and start from scratch. I don't think he ever really thought about how much work it would be, but to a 12-year-old kid, it sounded like a really good idea. I went around telling everyone I knew that we were going to clear out the forest and build something amazing back there. Unfortunately, my older brother got wind of my plan, and he decided he wanted to help. So one weekend when my parents weren't home, my brother and I gathered up all the gasoline-powered tools we could find and headed out into the forest. We figured that we needed to make a road of sorts so that we could get heavy equipment in there. So we started cutting down the smaller trees along the edge of the woods. Then we started cutting down the larger trees. But pretty soon, we ran into a problem. We didn't know where the trees were going to fall, and we kept getting jammed up by the branches and the underbrush. We worked for 2 days clearing out a path, but it was only about 10 feet wide, and we couldn't even get our four-wheeler through it. And then we realized we had another problem. My dad was going to kill us. We hadn't asked permission before we started cutting down his trees, and to make matters worse, there was a bunch of rotted logs lying around, and the forest floor was covered in sawdust. It looked like a lumberjack had been in there. I tried to convince my brother that we should just tell our parents what we'd done, but he refused. He said we needed a plan. So we sat down underneath a tree and tried to figure out what we were going to do. That's when my brother came up with the idea to cover up the evidence. He said if we buried the sawdust and filled in the holes from the cut trees, no one would ever know we'd been in there. So we started digging holes and burying things. We buried the sawdust in the holes from the cut trees, and then we tried to fill in the holes with dirt.